So with that intro by the incomparable Stevie Wonder, we'll go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, both attending on Zoom as well as on the Forward to Ferguson Facebook page. Thanks so much for joining us for the third event in our Power Behind the Badge series. So I'll just introduce it, give a little bit of information about us and what this series is about before we kick it off and let our panelists introduce themselves. So to start off, why are we even doing this series? So 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, after the killing of Michael Brown and the huge uprising that happened in the streets of Ferguson, across St. Louis, and across the nation, the Ferguson Commission started to do its work to look at the underlying root causes that caused a pattern of way too many Michael Browns, as well as disparities that exist in our education system and put our youth at a disadvantage and remove the opportunity to thrive from their lives, and how that affects housing and all of these issues across the St. Louis region and nationally. And so one of the largest areas was justice for all, about policing, about our municipal court systems and the ways that they often serve as injustice systems rather than actually serving up justice for residents. When we looked at that, those policies that over 3,000 community members helped to form and put forward for the region, we found that it was actually the area of the commission report that had the least amount of implementation in 5 years. In a lot of ways, it's not surprising. It was the third rail that really launched this into national attention and is incredibly disappointing and demoralizing. But what is exciting is all the people that are out on the street again in St. Louis, as well as leaders across the country who are advancing different ways that we can set up our public safety systems that lean out of this arrest incarcerate cycle and into more holistic public health centered approaches to public safety that also really center community voice. And so incredibly happy and excited to have this group of panelists from across the nation who are all working to transform public safety. Often St. Louis, we get in this bubble, but we are so excited to have the opportunity to learn from you all and also share some of the things that we've seen here in St. Louis. So I'll pass it over to Trey to intro himself, and then we'll go around the proverbial virtual table.
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Trey. I am the Justice for All Policy Advocacy Fellow, helping David out putting together the series and organizing some of the tools that we released as well. And I'm very excited to be here tonight to talk with these amazing people who I've read extensively about and excited to know just their insight on all of these things. So thanks.
So with that, I will first pass it to Anne. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Ann Larsen, and I live in Olympia, Washington, and work here in Olympia, Washington. I'm actually a civilian in the Olympia Police Department, and I oversee a crisis response unit, which is based off of the CAHOOTS model, and worked really closely with CAHOOTS. And then we also have a Familiar Faces program, which we have peer navigators, so individuals with lived incarceration, addiction, mental health, working with doing intensive case management for folks in our city that have a lot of contact with law enforcement and our crisis response unit.
Thanks for that intro, Anne. Arti?
Hi, thank you for having me, David and Trey. My name is Arti Walker-Peddakota. I live in Oak Park, Illinois. Oak Park, Illinois is a famously progressive, quote unquote, suburb of Chicago. It's the first suburb west of Chicago. I am an elected official here. I'm a trustee, and I'm one of the few trustees that is pushing to defund our police department in Oak Park. Last year, after hearing, I got elected in 2019, and shortly after I got elected, I kept on hearing so many stories about young Black and Latinx people getting stopped by the police, and we weren't doing anything about it. And so I'm a community organizer, and so we created this group called Freedom to Thrive Oak Park. And Freedom to Thrive Oak Park works with Royal, which is the Revolutionary Oak Park Youth Action League. And what we do is we provide data for their activism. So what we've done is FOIA'd the village government that I sit on, and we have released data that covers, much like what Forward Through Ferguson has done, releasing the budget, how much we spend on policing, releasing data about, racial profiling in our policing. And so we are just trying to FOIA everything we can and release that data and make it transparent, because the power of the data does change the conversation. And our hope is that we are able to defund the police and that we are able to create non-police response teams for things like mental health crises and homelessness. And that is, we are in our infancy. And so I'm very excited to be here and talk with all of you and learn, because I think that's an important part of movement building too. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Arti. Chas?
Hey, y'all. That's how we say you all in Texas. So I'm Chaz. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm the founder and ED of the Austin Justice Coalition. And I believe I'm here to talk about how we were able to take $150 million from the Austin Police Department and to actually explain what it means and what it looks like and how we got there. So, and I'm, always in solidarity with the work that organizers and what I would like to call people that are fighting for a better tomorrow are doing around the country. So I'm just glad to be here with you all.
Thanks, Chaz. And last but not least, Benjamin.
Hi, my name is Ben Brubaker. I am with Whitebird Clinic here in Eugene, Oregon, the kind of umbrella agency that is over the top of CAHOOTS. I've been doing mental health work for about 20 years now. Been with Whitebird for about 12, 13 years, starting off as a crisis worker here on our 24/7 crisis line and walk-in center, and then also doing work with the mobile intervention CAHOOTS services as a crisis worker. I stepped into administration here over time and am now one of our co-executive directors here at the agency. But CAHOOTS is part of what actually brought me to Whitebird originally. When I saw that model functioning out on the streets of Eugene, I really wanted to be a part of the agency because I saw that as a solution to a lot of the issues that I saw out in society that needed to be addressed around public safety response. And got to do that work for a number of years, continued to work as a crisis worker at times for the agency, but now mainly an administrator. Luckily, I'm now in a position to be able to help share this model with more folks and have had a focus for a number of years on how we can help other communities and assist them in trying to at least lay some foundations for whatever models each community comes up with. And so, with that, I believe that the CAHOOTS program and the kind of model that it represents is super effective in dealing with a lot of the issues that are being discussed today and across the country in the last few months. I also think, though, that it comes with being able to sit at the table with a diverse set of community partners, including law enforcement. And that, to me, one of the pillars of what's allowed the CAHOOTS program to grow and succeed here in Eugene, Oregon, is that partnership piece. One of the foundational philosophies at Whitebird for how we approach folks that we're serving in crisis or serving across the agency is around meeting people where they're at. And I believe that we take that approach to also how we interact with and talk to our partners across the community, of really being able to look at the person in front of you and meet them where they're at and find ways to agree and move forward with whatever ideas are on the table. And so that's a piece that I kind of would like to touch on today as we talk more.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks all of you for introducing yourself. We're, again, so pumped to have your perspectives and to be sharing the knowledge across regions, because we're dealing with the same system in different manifestations across the country, but the same roots. So with that, we always at Forward Through Ferguson like to start off with some community agreements for how we show up in the space. To attendees here on Zoom and those of you all on Facebook, if you ever see me looking to the left, I'm looking at the Facebook stream. We like to start off with some agreements because we want you all to be part of the conversation. So please do get in those comments, share, react to what people are saying, ask any questions here on Zoom or on Facebook. We want you all to be part of the conversation and see many of you all out in the community, so to speak, in these COVID times. And we know we will need all of you for us to transform our policy and systems here in St. Louis. So use a chat box, use I statements, speak for yourself into your experience. Assume good intent. We're here to transform public safety. So being constructive as much as we can. Leaning in, leaning out, give as much space as you take. Consider your positionality, practice a power analysis. Think about the ways that your identities show up and what systemic factors that brings into conversations. Expect discomfort and ambiguity. These are traumatic topics that have caused huge traumas for communities across the country, across decades, if not centuries, definitely centuries. So they're going to be difficult, but through that discomfort, there can be a chance for change. And also, where your turn to speak, there may be opportunities to bring community members in to actually ask their questions. So just be patient with us as we try and navigate cyberspace. So again, everybody, David Dwight, Executive Director and Lead Strategy Catalyst at Forward through Ferguson, and excited to be with you all. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about with you all is just to lift up these set of demands that a group of organizers and community organizations raised in St. Louis. So they include some immediate actions that we could take to start to end police violence in the region. Unfortunately, many of which haven't been taken up, but many community members have lifted up and signed on to, noting that we need bold transformative policies, not just reforms around the edges at this point. So demanding that CARES Act funds are actually going to public health, not towards increased policing. This one actually was accomplished within the last few months, which is exciting. The Workhouse, which for our national panelists is a notoriously terrible jail here in St. Louis, both in conditions as well as while we believe in reducing incarceration overall. This on top of that held a lot of people pre-trial because they couldn't pay their bail. Demanding the suspension of contract negotiations with the major police union here in St. Louis, which always does its negotiations in secret, away from public view. I mean, as we all know, is a huge barrier for accountability. In St. Louis, in the city, at least, we're a region that has over 45 police departments, but the city police department, which is the second largest, doesn't release its full unredacted budget to the public, even to most lawmakers. So most of the alders on our city council can't see it. And then we demanded a hiring and budget freeze until community members could engage with that budget and then have conversations about how resources should be allocated. So we just wanted to raise up these set of demands, not the only set of them that community members are raising up in St. Louis, but some of the ones that bubbled up to the top. And so the first thing that we wanted to actually ask you all, do these reflect the national conversation? Are there places where these have been lifted up in your communities or where you've seen success? And then lastly, is there anything missing here that you would raise up?
I'll comment just briefly and say that one of the things that I've actually started hearing from some folks across kind of all aspects, both from more of the activist side of things, as well as even folks within public safety, is the demand for federal level policy around law enforcement interaction. And that I've actually heard from chiefs of some bigger cities now that actually want to see that kind of legislation go back at the federal level. And I haven't seen that very coherently really coming out of some of the activist community, but I hope that that continues to be a big part of the conversation, is around really looking at standards and standardizing how law enforcement interacts with people across the country. I think as a side note to that, on a personal level, I also wonder about the use of chemical munitions, non-lethal munitions on the populace, and that being another aspect that I think the more recent months has pointed out to me and many others needs to be looked at and examined as part of that federal level policy.
Thanks, Shana. Arti?
Yeah, I'll add to that, and I'll say, like, you know, the demands that you shared in St. Louis are demands that are mirrored in Oak Park. Our demands at Freedom to Thrive were written in collaboration with our youth organizers, and they included things like, you know, Oak Park has created sort of walls with its policing, where we are on, our neighbor is Austin, the west side of Chicago, which is an area that has gone through decades of disinvestment and disenfranchisement by the city of Chicago. And as a result, it is considered a high crime area. And what we've done with Oak Park Police is create a wall where anybody that's coming into Oak Park automatically gets profiled because people think they're there to commit crimes. So what some of the youth organizers have demanded is, can we, and you know, this is not a demand that anybody has really ever seen before, but can we take some of our taxpayer dollars and from defunding the police and use them to build bridges and not walls with the Austin community, where we reinvest in that community. And I think that that's an incredible demand for youth organizers to make, because they understand that all of these communities are connected, and the success of Oak Park and the success of Austin are interconnected. So I think that that's an important demand, is not just thinking like in our localities, but also thinking about the ramifications about our movements in our cities and how that affects the cities around us. I'll also say, as a veteran, one of the demands that I've seen at the federal level that needs to make it down to the local level, so kind of talking opposite from Benjamin, is the 1033 program. So it does focus on, you know, the militarization of police, but that program is a program that, you know, has grown under multiple administrations, so not just Trump, but even under Obama, it grew. And that program allows for local police departments to pull any, you know, federal ammunition, or even things like paper shredders or garden shears, basically for free through a federal grant program. And that is not something we want our local departments to do. And a lot of local departments say, well, it saves us money. And it's like, well, does it really? Because your local tax dollars may not be used to pay for that stuff, but your federal tax dollars are. And it's really what that program is coming out of a burgeoning military industrial complex, where we have put so much money into that there's literally so much stuff that's left to give, you know, to local communities. So local communities can advocate to their local police departments, their state municipalities, to stop buying stuff from that 1033 program. I think that that's a demand that we do need to make. And not every police department gets stuff from that, but there are some in Illinois especially that do get more than others. So I think that that's an important demand that needs to be added.
Thanks for raising that. I remember just a few years ago, like 2 blocks from my house on this road, that is a major small business fair, that there were essentially militarized tanks firing, like you were saying, Ben, to chemical munitions into residential areas. Thank you so much for that. And Chaz, anything that you want to add in?
No, I think that was all perfect.
No, I think it really is great and reflects your community. I mean, there's just a dire need for transparency all around, and it's a lot of work. Like those demands, rolling those demands out is a lot of work, and that's where I think that I can hopefully come in and demonstrate how we've done some of those work pieces later on in this presentation.
Awesome, thank you all. And again, any of the attendees, please let us know if you have any questions at any point, and we'll definitely raise them up. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Trey, part of this Power Behind the Badge series, again, on to the point of what you were saying, and there's so much importance on transparency. And that's a huge barrier to accountability for residents if they can't see into where decisions are made, where power is flowing, where resources are flowing. And so as part of that, we started to create these power maps of who the decision makers that control things like the union contract, the budget, police policies, both outside and inside the department. And one of those tools, the last one that we haven't gone through, is what Trey is going to present, which highlights some of the major incidents of police violence that have happened in St. Louis. So Trey?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, those tools are available on our website. Put that in the chat. That'd be great for people to access. In the last two teach-ins, we went over both the county and city maps on how police and public safety departments were influenced by both elected and unelected actors. And this one is not as, this tool I'm about to show us is not as comprehensive, but it is very important in visualizing how we can keep police accountable and have more safe neighborhoods and communities. So I'm going to share my screen. So we wanted to show this graphic just to ground us before I get into the tool that we formulated. So this is mappingpoliceviolence.org. It's a website that maps police violence across the United States. And it's important to understand that they found that St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, so the city's police department, is the deadliest in the country, and that they kill more people per capita than any other city or any other police department that is in this data set by a lot, as you can see here. So just important just to ground us here that SLMPD, and we are in a unique region as well, where we have, across the county, we have over 50 police departments between St. Louis County and St. Louis City that could exacerbate more of these statistics we see. So it's important to understand that as we go into this tool. So this tool is, so the overview for this tool is that this is a timeline, if you will, of police incidents that have happened since 2017 to now. And it highlights some of the most egregious and some of the most high profile cases that have happened since then. And then it aligns these incidents with certain policy interventions and policy platforms that, if implemented or if taken seriously, could have either stop the incident from happening, or it could hold police accountable. So we want to go through a few examples, but this is more just to show how to navigate this tool. And then if you were to go on and look at this, you can go through it and analyze it more in depth. So this is not, again, it's not a comprehensive overview of every police incident that has happened across the region, but some of the few incidents that we thought we could highlight. So I'm going to go through just like the framework of the tool, and then I'm going to highlight some of the specific incidents, and that'll be this presentation. So if you click on this link, then you can go here and you can see there's two tabs. So one is the timeline of police incidents. So this just highlights all of the different incidents that we have put on this tool. Has the incident, the date of the incident, the associated police department. Again, we have a lot of police departments, so of course all of them are not represented on here, but we highlighted each police department that is associated with the incident of interest. The type of police or the type of incident that's happened. So if it was a police shooting, if it was negative or discriminatory comments made by police, incidents where police were harmed, assault by police, internal discrimination within police departments, and then police expansion. So giving more power and, like we just talked about, more military weapons or more funding to police to expand their reach in the region. You'll find a description of the incident. If you click here, you can expand here and it'll tell you all about what the incident is about. And then this is the important piece. So a policy that could have prevented the incident or held the police accountable. And we'll talk more about that a little later, but you can also click on this as well, and it'll show you the description of the policy, and then more information and more links you can click to get more information on that. And then the source, and then the zip code, so to give you a frame of reference of where the incident happened in the region. On this second tab, you will find, so there are 7 different policy interventions, and these are, of course, these are not all of the demands and policy platforms that exist in the region, but a few that we chose that we thought were prevalent for this moment. So you find the name of the policy intervention, the description of it. Again, you could click on this and it'll expand. You can also click on the name and it'll expand and show you all the information about that policy as well. A link to the fourth Ferguson call to action. So some of our calls to action from the original Ferguson Commission report do align with a few of these policy interventions. Other related resources, if you want to delve deeper into the topic. And then this is linked to the first tab showing the different incidents that are associated with each policy. So that's that. And then I'm going to show you how the data is visualized. So if you go on the right, you will see that there are tools here as well. If you click the full screen, you will see that there is a mini how-to guide on how you can use the tool if you forget this presentation. We have a search engine. So say if you want to look up a particular incident, so say you want to look up an incident that has to do with mental health, you can type in mental health and it'll show all the incidents that have to do with that. And then we have our timeline of incidents. So if you click on the full screen here, you can drag. So you have to click to drag to go around and look at the timeline. So from 2017 until now, it'll show you all the incidents that we highlighted according to their date. And there are a few incidents that I want to highlight and just put in the framework so you can think about how to think about these incidents. So the first incident I want to talk about is the Stockley case. So most of us know what happened in 2017 when former police officer now, Jason Stockley, was found not guilty for the murder of Anthony Lamar Smith, who was murdered in 2011. And you will find the incident, the date of the incident, again, all these measures, the description of the incident, and then the policy that could have prevented this incident or held police accountable. So, so we aligned this with the reform use of force policies. And also in here should also be the interruption of the police union contract as well. And it's important to understand that these policies aren't like the savior or like the end all be all of what like should happen. There's a lot of like different policy interventions and a lot of things outside of this incident that should have happened to, not allow this incident to happen. But so say our use of force policies right now in our police union contracts and all of our laws on how we keep the police accountable, a lot of those laws favor police and it favors them over the civilian or resident that is also involved in the incident as well. So how can we rethink those use of force policies? How can we make it to where there's equal weight given on the health and well-being of both the police officer and the civilian, so that in these incidents police can be held more accountable legally for that. So just thinking like whether this type of policy could have been implemented, how would this have turned out differently? And then there's one more incident that I want to highlight. And just for content warning, before we start on this one, it does have to do with suicide and mental health issues. So if you want to, pause this section or mute this section for a second, you can go ahead and do that. I'll give you a few seconds to do that if you want. So this incident, so I'll just explain the incident and I'll give you a framework. So in this incident, there was a veteran who was pretty distressed over his health. He had just suffered from a stroke, and he told his significant other that he wanted to commit suicide by cops. So you see in the description, he called 911. The police came out. The police were, going back and forth with him verbally. He had a gun, and he did point the gun at the police officers, and the police officers did shoot and killed him. And the policy that we aligned this with was established, and we'll talk about this more. I'm excited for the panelists to give their perspective and experience with this, as far as establishing non-police first responders to mental health crises. But I did want to say that everyone with mental health issues or mental health crises are not violent, and that they don't pose dangers to themselves or society. And in some cases like these, it can escalate to violence. But there are also a lot of like interventions that should have happened before, like say if there were more mental health resources for veterans, coming back from war to have, and to use, so they won't, be at a place where they have to feel like they have to commit suicide. And it's also important to understand that we do have people in the U.S. and other places around the world that respond to mental health crises. And this is a job to respond to nonviolent mental health crises and also instances that the incident or the particular incident could get violent. So, it's not unconscionable to think about other people who are not armed to respond to these type of crises. And there's also countries around the world who, like in the UK, that the police don't even carry guns and are not armed. So just again, like this just the way you can think about this is, let's just think beyond where we are now, and then how could this incident have been different, both in this particular incident and also like how could this incident not even happen if there were other resources available for people like this person who was killed by the police. So that's the timeline. You can click on any other ones and kind of think through that framework again. And lastly, there's also a map to show you in general where these incidents happen. Up here, you can like click on the different view, like a map, satellite view if you want. And you can click on each one and it will show you where the incident happened, so it give you a framework on where these things are happening. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about the Ethical Society of Police's recent report. They recently put out a report, I believe it was on August 5th. Also, the Ethical Society of Police is a organization within the police department, both the city and the county, that represents African-American officers. And they highlight a lot of like discriminatory practices that happen both in the community and also within the police departments as well. And they put out this report on August 5th, outlining about over 200 instances of police discrimination against Black officers and officers of color within SLMPD, so within the city department. So if you go to the website, you can find this report. It's right on the website. And then if you scroll down, they have, they just number off the amount of times that police officers internally face discrimination. And this is, pretty unique and rare. I feel like a lot of police departments don't have these type of documents that outline the internal, toxic culture that potentially exists in police departments across the country. So if you check that out, they'll give you more reference on that. So are there any questions on this tool before we continue with our panelist discussion? Or are there anything you want to add, David, to this?
No, just, yeah, really thankful for the Ethical Society of Police, because of course the depth of our fractured and way systemic racism shows up in St. Louis is that we have a majority white and majority Black police union, the majority Black police union of which has no legal representation with the department or contract. And so they have, and especially Heather Taylor, the president, who is currently an officer, is actually about to retire, partly because of the toxic culture. They really just detailed incidents that have happened internally, and even ways that Black officers have faced discrimination within the department. So just wanted to give a woot woot to Heather Taylor and all that she does. So with that, we're going to start talking less and start hearing more from our amazing panel. So you all got a chance to introduce yourselves, so we'll jump in. What does a transformed public safety system look like to you? So we're starting off easy. And then what do you see as the biggest barriers to transformation towards that system?
Jump in. So for me, a response that's going to be an alternative response needs to be as robust and supported as the current first responders that are working. So whether that be fire or law enforcement. And we have great alternative responses here in Olympia. We have the crew team, that we built before a time of crisis that had community support and law enforcement support. And we have a robust familiar faces program that's now even bigger than the crisis response unit. But what needs to happen is it needs to be a career choice like law enforcement and fire. And so my biggest struggle right now is I have these fantastic teams and we're doing fantastic work. And a corrections officer in Olympia, let's just say, will make $80,000 or $90,000 to watch the same individual in jail that we're paying a peer $36,000 to keep out of jail. And so when you're looking at an alternative response that's going to be sustainable, I want people to get into this profession and be like, I got the job and I'm so excited because this is the job that I'm going to work in for a long period of time, and there's going to be promotion opportunities, and I'm going to be able to take a vacation, and I'm going to be able to take care of my mental health because I'm being paid enough that I don't need to have another job. And so for me, that is really where I'm like, that's the new hill I'm going to die on. Like, I've built great programs, but we need to stop contracting out, trying to find the cheapest labor to do that work, and bring it, whether it be within the city or within the police department, but make it equitable to what we're paying the current first responders.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that's like a really powerful dichotomy, because people talk about a lot in St. Louis how like budgets are value documents, and examples like that show which role we value more in our society based solely on the resources that we allocate towards it. So yeah, powerful example. Sorry, Chaz, go ahead.
So I guess this is where my Capricorn comes out, because this is definitely like a Debbie Downer type of answer. But I think the answer to this question for me is, you know, in regards to the barrier, I think the barrier is like us, the people. I think, and not all of us, right? But I mean, it is all of us because we're not willing to struggle together for this new thing, right? Like I've been to protests for basically my whole adult life at this point, right? Because 18, then Black Lives Matter happened. Like my whole adulthood is protests and rallies and fighting for survival. And then I would argue that, you know, before that, I just was a naive young man. I've been doing this my whole life, just wasn't aware of it, and at this very unique perspective that I have now. But I'm also like, and I say us because like, I think as much as we talk about creating this new, we still very heavily depend on the thing we have now, right? So like, and I think we're all guilty of it. Like if somebody broke into my house right now, my first instinct is to call this thing that I want to get rid of, right? The same thing with the struggle with the justice for Breonna Taylor. You know, yes, we want justice for her, but me as a prison abolitionist, I can't get down fully with we need to arrest the cops that killed her, right? So I think the fact that we're not willing to struggle uniquely together in a very serious way, I think we have to take some of that on us, because of course a barrier is police unions, right? Of course the barriers are the lawmakers that, you know, I have a governor that says back to blue. So you know, it's of course it's all of that, but it's also the white supremacy, the patriarchy, the homophobia. It's all those things that's embedded in us as well, right? I tell people all the time, we can burn the system down. Like, yes, let's do that. But if you're bringing the internal shit with you too, it doesn't matter, because we'll just it'll reiterate itself, right? So I think, and I'm not saying that we need anarchy. I'm not saying any of that, but I think we have to really, at some point, hopefully soon, because the way white supremacy and capitalism works, like the planet is going to fix this problem for all of us, right? We won't have anything to bigger over in like 10 to 20 years if we keep the shit that we're doing up. But I think if we can get to a place where we recognize that we need to take care of the earth, and we get to this very key understanding that the only way we can get to the place we need to is this very real and intimate struggle that in no way depends on the things we have now, then we'll just keep having webinars and Zooms and marches and rallies, right? Which is fine, because the work you all are doing is fine. And I'm not picking on anybody here. I'm just like, at some point, I think, we just have to really stop relying on this thing. And we also have to stop expecting this system that works the way it's supposed to. Like it's a level of healthy critique of the system that I think you have to challenge it. And I'm going a little bit long-winded, so I'll wrap it up. But I tell people all the time, like, the work that we do in the reform area is equivalent to Hodor for my Game of Thrones fans, right? Hodor did what he did, went out like a chimp to make sure that the people he was with could get further along. But he knew like they wasn't gonna stop there. He gave them just enough time to get further along, because if Hodor didn't do what he did, those creatures in this example is a system would have swallowed them up immediately, right? So that's why we need, like, that's why it's a both and. We need reform, and we also have to dismantle and pull so we can get to new. But I think we have to have a serious conversation about how do we practice actually doing this.
Well said, and with a Game of Thrones reference, so like.
Can I yes and that? I mean, I haven't watched Game of Thrones, so I don't understand that reference. I'm sorry, but I think like everything that was just said is so important. Like just the context around Oak Park, I think is what is the struggle that's happening in Oak Park is the struggle I think a lot of cities are facing. So Oak Park is this like woke progressive, we did a Fair Housing Act right when the civil rights movement was happening, and that's the most progressive thing we've ever done, and that's it. That's what we hang our hat on. And when the conversation came around defunding the police, I sit on a board where everybody was like, reform, use of force. And I'm like, but our use of force policy is fine. Our use of force policy is actually fine. We don't even have a problem with that. And they were like, we'll hire an outside police consultant to evaluate the department and tell us what's wrong with it. And I'm like, well, that's trash. We don't want to do that. So I voted no on that. People are so willing to continue to prop up a system that harms people because it's not harming the people in power. That is the real problem. And the thing that I find in Oak Park really is that we have a board and we even have community members that are like, but I moved here to be comfortable. Even people of color in my community. And I love my community. But we have a lot of people in my community that are like, Arti, I moved here for the schools and I moved here to be comfortable. And you're asking me to speak out and fight a fight I don't want to fight. And it's like, well, do we want to change things? Because our young people are saying that they're sick and tired of getting profiled. Like our police chief will get up there and say, I know what happens in other police departments. We don't do that here. We haven't had anybody shot and killed by the police. We haven't had anybody's knees on anybody's necks. We don't have a problem here. But you look at the data and you see the data says that 94% of the minors stopped by Oak Park police are Black. And we only have 18% of a population of Black people in Oak Park. That is still violence. Like, I don't think in Oak Park, like the conversation is, well, we don't do, George Floyd incidences don't happen in Oak Park. But it's like, this is still violence because that shit is harmful. Our youth are saying that it's harmful and we're not even listening to them. And then the adults are saying, well, sorry, that is too uncomfortable of a conversation for me to have. If we are not able to just work through that discomfort, we are never ever going to get to a place in Oak Park and other like woke progressive cities where we're willing to say, yeah, we don't need the police. We don't need to spend $25 million in Oak Park on a police department for a town of 50,000 people. We don't need that. We can do something else with that. So I resonate with everything that Chaz just said, because we have so many people in our community that are just not okay with being uncomfortable. And if they are, it's like in private. And I get it. Like, you'll get attacked. I get attacked all the time because I'm the only person on the board speaking out on these issues. And I'm like, well, I don't really give a, like, can I swear? I don't know if I can, but you know, like, I don't care, because I don't really care about getting reelected. What I care about is, am I fighting for the people who don't have representation and who feel like they haven't been heard? And if our biggest problem, and this is like, I think our fights are multiple. Our fights are to defund the police and policy change, but our fights are also electoral. Like, I'm all about like burning down the system, but the fact is the system is in place. So we need to also fight electorally. And that is the other thing that we're doing, is organizing so we can get some more progressive trustees in the 2021 election cycle that'll actually vote on these issues. And we don't have to convince them that, hey, we are harming people. So that's what I have to say about that.
That reminds me of this quote. Bethany Johnson-Giroir she was the managing director of the Ferguson Commission and also runs Integrated Health Network. And she often says that transformed people transform systems. And that just reminds me of what both of you all are saying too. Like, we have to like also think about how we're ready to orient ourselves in the world and be bold, like you're saying, Arti, and like say the things, and also recognize the ways that we buy into the systems to actually get somewhere different. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to comment here, just because I definitely feel like the position Whitebird Clinic's in is one that is very challenging. And I just had, you know, somebody reported the other day kind of asked for clarity around, wait, you guys started off as kind of this, you know, hippie started, counterculture started, all grassroots effort, but then here you are, you know, 30 years later, now 50 years later, working closely with law enforcement. And like, how did that happen? You know, and I mentioned earlier that piece about trying to meet people where they're at. And I think that, you know, I really resonate and agree with everything that's being said here. And I know on the day-to-day, having an alternative response out there at all is starting to impact people's lives in front of us. And by having the experience of doing that, of having the chance to have somebody who looks like me show up to a scene, call ahead, maybe even talk to the person, they're like, yeah, they're not going to respond well to uniformed officers. And I could get in front of that call and say, hey guys, I got this. I feel safe. I talked to them, they're de-escalated enough, I feel good. Can you all just like take off and we'll just try to handle this. We'll call you if we need you. And they left. Is such a powerful position in that microcosm, in that moment, right? I don't know how that then relates to like, is that then me doing enough for these larger issues of we need to change these larger infrastructural issues that just need to freaking change? You know what I'm saying? I believe it is, because I believe it's the individual that we're really trying to help, A. B, I feel like we have to respect diversity of tactics, including those people that work within the systems for change and maybe aren't quite ready to go to the burn it down and cheer on the third precinct burning down in Minneapolis. Maybe they're not there yet, you know what I'm saying? But that diversity needs to be respected so that as many people are helping with wherever they're at, ready to help. You know, so I definitely have some more of the activist side, abolitionist sides of you know, our own internal agency or here in the community, calling me, others out about how we're working within these infrastructures that are damaging. And I'm like, yeah, I know, and I want those other things to change, and I want to do that. And the moment-to-moment stuff that we're doing currently is really important to me. You know, and so I think that there's also, even within some of those larger calls for how do we like really tear down these systems and really make this change, I also think that if you have a doorway in to get the people on the ground starting to impact and starting to transform that public safety system and get other people out there, then I think that you do it. And if those people can also set aside their own personal philosophies, politics, to say, I'm going to work with maybe these people that I don't ideologically agree with, that's also really powerful. And I'll just end with saying, like, one of the history pieces of how the CAHOOTS program came about that I found really interesting was when the initial pilot project was formed between both public safety and Whitebird back in the late 80s, the swing vote on the city council was not somebody who we thought would vote for us and for for a different kind of intervention being a part of the public safety response. But Whitebird Clinic had already been around for 20 years at that point. And when it came time to vote, he directly said, I know these people will do good work. They've helped my friends, family members before. You know, and I think that that's the other piece that I think that we need to look at as we're looking at reforming these systems is, good, let's create some systems. You know, let's create some systems. How are you going to create a crisis response system in your area? And if you don't want to do it in coordination directly with law enforcement because that's untenable or feels like too much of a compromise, that's fine. Create it however you can. We have these great mobile devices now. There's awesome apps that we've actually seen in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, a group that actually had a mobile flag down where they were giving people the app to call their crisis response. And then they turned around and offered that to officers too and said, here, if you guys want to call us, here's how you get a hold of us through this app. But they did it totally separate, but they did it. And they got into a position where they were getting contacted instead of the police. And I guess I just would say, like, my hope is that all of us can continue to support whatever those efforts, whatever those tactics are, because all of it is a part of this larger conversation and this larger transformation that we're trying to do. You know?
Yeah, thanks, Ben, for that. That's a great segue into our next question we have for you all. And there's probably people on the call who are hearing like terms like first responder alternative that aren't really clear about what that is or what that means. And maybe Ann or Ben, could you explain what a first responder alternative or like a first responder is, and like what a first responder alternative to police is? And then for all the panelists, how is that important in our conversations around transforming our public safety system?
Sure, I'll go and say like what we've done here in Olympia. And I think before we go on, like, I'm available if anyone, I'll make sure that David and Trayvon have my info. So if there's somebody in the audience that or on this panel that wants information about the nuts and bolts about what we did, I'm happy to share. But we based our model off of CAHOOTS. And if you haven't ever seen the magic, when COVID ends, go out and see the magic, because it's super magical to ride along with a CAHOOTS van. Our chief came from Eugene, and he had seen the magic of what happens when the right tool is implemented in the right situation. So in Olympia, one of our goals in our first responders for our crisis response unit is we're 100% street-based outreach. We're 100% harm reduction, trauma-informed, culturally competent. So what I want in our first responders, in our crew team, they are on police radio. So they're hearing everything that's going on, but they're also out in the community. And so they see somebody in distress. They see somebody without shoes on in the middle of winter. They see somebody having a mental health crisis. We're not waiting for someone to call 911. They're engaging that person right there. So if you can get to somebody before they ever even need to call 911, that's to me like the ultimate. We also have a community that is incredibly mistrustful of the 911 system. So there's an opportunity for people to call 911 to get our crisis response unit, but they also have cell phones on them that are local domestic violence partners, our shelters, our low barrier clinics have those cell phone numbers, so they can call the crew team directly to get services. So just being aware and asking your community how they want the response to look, and then adapting, not auguring in and being like, no, you need to call 911 because we need to be able to track that call, like understanding that the person, like Ben was saying, for me, the transformation comes in those lives that we respond to the person that we're responding to in crisis. Like that is, for me, where the magic happens, that person was treated with the ultimate unconditional human regard. And so, and then on the flip side, on the opposite side of our crew team, is we have first responders that have lived experience. So they're peers, and they are working along law enforcement. Our first peer was on DOC supervision and here in the police department. And if you want to see like a magic happen between in front of the badge and behind the badge, is you start having officers work with folks that they had formerly encountered in a completely different manner. And that peer has experience with addiction and mental health and incarceration that I can never have. Like I could, but I don't, at this point, I don't want to have it. But that law enforcement officer has a completely different experience, and the two experiences together, working together to serve a person, is magical. Like we had a peer that our jail wouldn't let go in and visit one of his clients because, you know, you can't let a felon in to visit another felon. And our sergeant was like, that's bullshit. Like, and got him in the car and went to the jail and visited that client with that peer. Like, law enforcement can break down some barriers as well. So I think for me, a first responder is who is intercepting, who is diverting an arrest, who is diverting an extended stay in jail, and using the right tool at that point for that diversion.
And I don't know if it's appropriate here for me to just step in and maybe just give a little bit more around what the CAHOOTS model looks like exactly, but basically it's a medic and a crisis worker. That's kind of the best practice that we're kind of recommending, just because that gives you somebody that's looking more holistically at the person in front of you. And when you look at something like a diabetic emergency that can present as if they're intoxicated, that could be a very tragic outcome, even with the best intentions of your responders, if you don't have somebody right there to help make sure that blood sugar isn't maybe an issue with the individual, and that doesn't even really have to do with alcohol. But it's a medic and a crisis worker who respond together. We have a van that has a separate patient compartment where we can transport people if necessary, although we do focus heavily on trying to just stabilize people where they're at and get them connected up with existing services that they maybe already know about, or help tap into their own coping skills. Very trauma-informed, really an empowerment model. We believe everybody already knows what they need to do. We don't need to show up as the know-it-all professionals that are somehow going to rescue or save somebody from themselves. And we're directly dispatched through the police non-emergency line, which means that they're calling into dispatch, but we work very closely with dispatch to go over protocols, make sure they're sending the right people to the right kind of calls. Plus our teams are then able to monitor traffic. So when we hear something going maybe to a pocket that it doesn't need to go to, we can be like, hey, we're familiar. We know that address. We know that individual. You sure you don't want us to go? Which again gives us that moment-to-moment call-to-call ability to interface and put ourselves in the right situations to be able to be of the most service. That dispatch communication becomes crucial to keeping our workers safe. We're not armed. We're fully a voluntary service, so we're not going to force anybody to do anything. That comes with attention because we're also mandatory reporters as mental health specialists. So if somebody's a clear risk to themselves or others and they really don't want our help, we'll leave, but we'll be very clear. Well, somebody else is going to show up then because this isn't working. But that's rare that we have to do that, but we do at times have to. That dispatch protocol also gives us a chance for training opportunities, both through the de-escalation trainings and other kinds of CIT trainings that a lot of officers have. We've had the opportunity more recently to actually sit down and be a part of that training, and we offer de-escalation trainings locally and abroad, and have been able to actually bring that in to work with the police here in some of their trainings. But we also are able to go in and separate out some things. So if somebody has a gun and is threatening to kill themselves, that probably would not be a CAHOOTS call up front. they would stage us in the area, but it still may be that officers go in first. Now, officers go in first knowing that we're en route and going to be staged in the area, and I will note that as another value, in my opinion, to how they approach the situation, because we're around the corner. You know what I'm saying? And then once the scene's clear, they might call us in and say, okay, hey, this person's good. Like, they just need to talk to somebody now. We've, made it safe or whatever. If somebody has a knife, that still may go to PD, but again, stage us. Self-harm started getting sent really heavily. And I don't know if folks kind of know how to pull those two things apart, but self-harm is like when somebody cuts on themselves. It's a maladapted coping skill. It's not the same level of lethality. They're not trying to hurt themselves, or kill themselves. And they're also not trying to it's low lethality for the individual and for responders. And so we worked with police to say, hey, look, that's our bag. Tell them to put away whatever they're using. We're good to go into that kind of call. That's different. And it took a little bit of conversation with our mental health professionals to convince them and kind of show them how that was different. But it allowed us to be able to get into a wider access of people that otherwise they would have just sent, police at knee jerk because there was something edged involved. And I'd say that's one just example that highlights the ongoing conversation we're constantly having with our law enforcement partners and with dispatch about what kinds of calls we're going to and whether or not it's appropriate. And we comment when we don't think we're being used appropriately, or when we think that law enforcement's being thrown at stuff that isn't necessary. So it gives us this ongoing dialogue that I think is also really important to creating a kind of a successful program ongoing. And then I'll comment just because this kind of is relevant to the question that came up, and I think I just sent it back out to the panelists and didn't get the attendees, but somebody had asked the question of, preventative, more upstream kinds of care needed to be funded as well as response. And I'd say, yes, they definitely need to go hand in hand. Each community is going to need to assess where they have the greatest need, where the biggest gaps in their safety net are. Now, a mobile response program going up gives you another set of eyes on the ground to say where your holes are at, what are the kinds of calls we're encountering a lot where we just don't have a good answer. But it does run the risk of just being another road to nowhere. Shelter is still a huge issue in Eugene, and our staff hates that we don't have good access to shelter because we encounter that issue over and over again, and they don't always have good solutions. We sometimes hand people a sleeping bag and a tarp, which when we talk more about, budgets being reflective of values, I totally agree with that here locally, where we're still don't have good shelter, and we've had this issue for half a century now. But on the other side, though, part of the CAHOOTS program was created at the same time that we created a non-criminal sobering center, actually using, again, public safety funds to help fund a sobering center that was non-criminal. So it gave CAHOOTS the ability to take somebody somewhere and be like, we're not arresting you, but let's get you somewhere safe just to sleep it off. And that service is crucial. And in fact, during some of the COVID stuff, we lost that service because of COVID-related worries. And it was painful for myself and other workers that we didn't have that alternative. So I definitely think that both of those things need to be assessed at the same time as you're looking at how to deal with funding. The last thing I'd say, just because it's related to funding, is part of what may help some of the conversations locally is around the idea that there's a lot of other pockets that benefit from a mobile intervention program. Not only can the law enforcement folks maybe hear that it's going to actually help them to deal more with the stuff that we maybe, some of us to varying degrees would agree they should be dealing with. So it's a cost savings, time savings measure for them, but there's also an awful lot of work that we do around ER diversion. And I would say that we save our local public benefits payers or whoever's doing your indigent care and ends up kind of getting the burden of that on them. We save them millions of dollars probably in ER diversion, simply because we send the right person to the right kind of call, and we're able to tie them more directly into services. And the overutilization of ERs is clear in almost any community. And so whoever your public health insurance benefit payer is, or whoever's involved in indigent care, they stand a lot to gain, and maybe they should be looking at their wallets too. And that pocket is another source of funding. Because those diversified funding streams are really important. And indeed, that was how we broke into Springfield, which is a traditionally more conservative area that's a sister city kind of here, a same metro area with Eugene, because we got state funding to the county for mobile crisis intervention. And now we even have our local CCO that does our public insurance benefit paying also contributing a little bit to help make sure our infrastructure is tight. So I'm just saying, like, there's other people that benefit from this too. And if you can bring those other funders and start talking again about that partnership model of how do we get everybody to the table to do this cost benefit analysis, I think that might also open up some people, even if they can't hear that it's the humanistic, humane, right thing to do. The bean counters ears will perk up quickly when you start saying things like millions and ER diversion.
Thanks, Ben and Ann, for walking us through that. So this next question is for Chaz. We know the Austin Justice Coalition has had some wins on police union contracts. That's something that's really relevant right now in St. Louis because the major contract for the city police department just went up for renegotiation at the beginning of the summer. And right now they're deadlocked. So they've kind of paused. And so they're just continuing on the old contract. In the county, the largest police department, they're just about to have their sergeants have their contract renegotiated. So just wanted to hear more about what are the effects of police unions and their collective bargaining agreements. Like, why did you all center this as one of the things you were going to work on? And could you talk about the wins that you all have had?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that in the world of policy reform, there's no such thing as policy reform in any place that has a police union. Because on the front end, it looks like you have this really good policy, but then in a police union contract, in between the lines, it's something that oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, negates the good policy work that you're doing, right? You know, like we just had some crazy stuff in our police union contract. If an officer did something that was only punishable by like written reprimand or reduce your written reprimand of 3 days or less, or something crazy like this, then it would just disappear after like 3 years, right? So, you know, and we're talking about holding officers accountable, bad apples, but if everything just disappears after a certain amount of time, then there's no paper trail. When we looked at the fact that cops were getting paid, and actually I think this is still in there, but they were getting paid time and a half or 4 times and a half overtime, some crazy number for going to court, right? They give you a ticket, then they go to court and they get paid so much money after overtime. It was another weird thing in there about, the police, our oversight, both the civilian and the Office of Oversight. Basically, the oversight office can do anything. Second of all, it was crazy that the oversight entity was in the police union contract at all. When you talk about like the Fox Garden Hen House, it was no more perfect example than that. But anyway, we got started with the police union contract fight here because we realized very quickly that anything we wanted to do on a policy front was going to be canceled out by the things in the police union contract. So we came up with a list of, I think 8 or 9 things, and literally for 18 months of my life, and this is prior to us having funding. I was a bartender, right? I was getting home at 4 a.m., waking up, going to a police union contract meeting at 8 a.m., staying there till 5 p.m., and you can't even talk at these meetings. It's the city, it's the union, and you sit here and you take as many notes as you can because they don't give you any handouts. Like if you say, can you go back? They just look at you like you're fucking stupid. So, you know, like for 12 months of my life, we went to these meetings, we took notes, and we tried to convince the city negotiating team to, really fight for these things seriously and get the union to do them. They didn't fight that hard. And then on top of that, the union was like, these guys are dumb. They don't know what they're talking about, blah, 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 blah. So what we did was we went to every district in the city. We have 10 districts, and we let everybody know why this was important, right? Because some people care about Black Lives Matter. Some people care about, the reform and all that good stuff. But then some people, and a lot of people care about the money, right? So this contract was poised to give the highest paid police department in the state already another $82.5 million bonus, right? So like yes, we did all the social justice stuff, and we had all the social justice. We had a social justice one pager, why this makes sense one pager, and then a money thing, because that's just how it is. And when people realized that the cops were not doing any changes with the current context going on in the country 2 years ago, we were able to really make it make sense on a broad level. We had like, we had the dog park people come out. We had, you name it, they came out because they wanted their police department to either not be harmful to Black people and people of color or people in the margins, or probably quite selfishly, they wanted to have the best police department for their own safety. But anyways, we were able to get 300, 400 people come out for like a 9-hour meeting. And in December of 2017, I think Austin is still the only city, which sucks, that unanimously voted against the police union contract. I would say voted against the police union contract at all since then. Which is very problematic, and maybe I'll get to talk about that later. But what that did was, and it really set up all these other police wins we had, right? Because that was a shift in power, right? I can't name too many cities in America that tells the police no for anything. So here we are unanimously. So now that lets the police union know that they don't have the political power that they once had. And they walked away. They said they wasn't coming back to the negotiating table. Okay, we was like, fine, we'll just go back under state law, and which is worse than the police union contract, but at least we're not paying y'all extra to be, twice as shitty. And then they missed their benefits after 3 months. They came back, they took all of our reforms except one, which was the 180-day rule, which essentially, if Benjamin does something today, the department only at that time had 180 days from the date he did that thing to review it and come to some conclusion. We got a slight tweak to date of discovery, right? So even if Benjamin did it today, if I'm the chief of police and I found out about it a year later, now I have 180 days from that date of discovery to do my thing. But we just think, like, let's just get rid of this number, right? If a cop who has taken an oath to protect and serve does something fucked up, we need to be able to hold him accountable to that for at least a year or two. We're not saying forever because the statute of limitations on everything except murder, I think. But that's something that we're still fighting for. But other than that, to be honest with you, the fact that we kicked their ass, right? And we kicked the police union's ass, and I'm proud to say that. If I don't do nothing else in my career of activism, we kicked their ass. I think what that did was allow city council and the power structure to show, it showed them that the police union and the police department doesn't have the power to get you out of office, right? Because the union swore up and down, if you vote against this contract, you won't be here. And we have our same council, so everything worked out fine. And I think that's the only reason that we were able to do this $150 million thing. So I'm more than willing to sit down and talk with anybody on our strategy, but I also realize, and I've turned down a lot of money from foundations who like this cookie cutter approach, which blows my mind. I can't stand it because I would be a fool to come up to St. Louis or Oak Park or wherever you are and be like, hey, just do it like we did it, right? Because the political landscape is different. Everything is different, right? But I'm more than willing to come strategize and let people know how we did things, and then you can tweak it and make it make sense. But I really deeply in my heart think that you have to disrupt the power that police unions have. And that's either by really getting in their contract, or because I realized that in some cities, you can't even go to a police union contract meeting, right? Some cities have police union contracts, like Houston, they'll have a meeting, but they won't post it. So it's just not a public can't get involved. But I think even if you can do something like what we've done here is we created a website that it's like a pledge for people that are in office or running for office to not take money from police unions. That's how you disrupt that power, right? And I think it's absolutely critical to do that so we can get to a place of better policing, if that's a thing that I'll say. or just like a policing that makes sense. And then also, I think it's really important too, to make sure that, oh man, I just blanked. But I think it's really important that the fight that you all are doing around police union contract, like, you have to do that fight. It is critically important in this current context that we're in, because no matter all other things, the police union will find a way to fuck you. And that's true in every jurisdiction, whether it is a police. Oh, this is what we're working on. My bad. We are working on getting rid of the police union here. We are working on putting it on a ballot to get rid of the police union, because police unions hide behind the veil that they're actual like union, like working class union, which is the furthest thing from the truth. So we're actually working on a ballot initiative for May, for us to not have them at all. And hopefully that's something that people around the country join us in.
Thanks, Chaz. This next question is for Arti. So we know that your work with the Freedom to Thrive Oak Park has been doing work around school resource officers and keeping students safe in schools. So what are the consequences of having SROs, school resource officers, in schools? And then what are some alternative ways we can keep our kids safe while they're learning?
Yeah,
if we go back to normal with COVID.
I know. If our kids ever get back to actual school, which I wish they did, because I have 2 young kids at home, and virtual school is not fun. But yeah, in Oak Park, surprisingly, that this is one of the recent wins that we've had. We, Freedom to Thrive, along with Royal, which is the youth organizing group that has been fighting on this issue for over 2 years, well before Freedom to Thrive came on board. Really what we did was we put out a letter that was just blasted to all of the board members' emails. So the problem in Oak Park, and I think a lot of smaller municipalities will have this problem, is that most of your elected officials are not full-time elected officials. Like I have a full-time job in tech, and then my part-time job is as an elected official. And so it's really hard to get in contact with them, to talk to them, to like just interface with them. That's a very difficult thing to do. But their emails are always there, right? We all have public emails. And so we put a letter in collaboration with Grassroots Collaborative, which is actually a Chicago organizing group. And it's like an umbrella organization with like CTU is a partner, the Chicago Teachers Union is a partner. So it's just a huge grassroots collaborative organizing group. And so they actually helped us put out a form letter, and over 400 people ended up signing that letter. All of the board members for both of our school districts got that letter. And we showed up in public comments since last year, telling people, I showed up at a board meeting saying like, we don't want SROs in our school. And the thing is, like, the ACLU has a great report called Bullies in Blue that actually talks about the history of policing in school and how it's always been there, but it really expanded in the 1990s after the Columbine shooting. That is really when SROs, school resource officers, and police in schools really started to expand, because there was this fear that every school was gonna, unfortunately go through a mass shooting, which obviously, is a valid fear. But the fact of the matter is SROs are really harmful, because what happens is that it really opens up the school to prison pipeline for Black and brown youth in schools, right? And what we've seen with SROs, and even in Oak Park, even though we don't police that way, is that Black and brown kids and young people were being harmed, right? They were not feeling safe with the SROs in their schools. They didn't see the SROs as people that they could trust to go to with problems. Instead, what the young people were asking for is, can we get social workers? Can we get mental health care professionals? Can we get people that actually will see us for young people and not see us as criminals? And that really is what we need to move towards. Unfortunately, Chicago is still having this fight. Chicago and Lori Lightfoot, who is not the progressive mayor that everybody thinks she is. Chicago has an appointed school board, and we have there's some amazing youth organizing happening in Chicago to try and convince that appointed school board to revoke the SRO contract. So I think like this is a winnable issue, because the question should be, why is it that in a school, in a place of education, why is it that we are criminalizing our youth? And where else can we put that money? Where can we put that money so that our youth actually can thrive? Because we know, like even in Oak Park, in a school, like Oak Park had this documentary called America to Me that was on Stars, TV or whatever last year. And it talked about the opportunity gap between Black and brown students and white students in Oak Park and how it grows from elementary school to high school. All of these things are connected, right? When we treat our young Black and brown kids as criminals and we stop them at a higher rate than white kids, they are, do we really expect them to say, all right, now I'm going to show up to the school and do amazing on this test where I don't feel welcome? Like all of this is connected. And I think we need to start looking at issues from a holistic perspective and not just this is a school issue or this is a city council issue, but these are all interconnected issues. So I would say to people that are fighting for this, and there are a lot of communities that are fighting for this, the young people are your voice on this. I am just a vehicle for that. Like I feel like every elected official needs to do that. Like we are vehicles for the people in our community that don't have, either because they are not old enough to, to get elected, but don't have that seat of power. And so go to the young people, figure out what it is they're demanding, and put those demands in your policies. And that is how we win on these issues.
Thanks for sharing that, Arti. And kind of off of that, talking about how youth can be engaged and we're raising up their voices, we wanted to ask you all kind of more broadly, what are the ways that communities should play a role in policy efforts and in shaping public safety reform? Are there any like community voice or community power processes that you have in your community or that you've seen across the nation that you really look to as a model?
I mean, I can start answering that. I will say in my community, we don't have that process. What I would love to see as a trustee, and I don't think we'll see this with the current board that I have, but what I would love to see is that we bring young people into policymaking. And so what I do, because we don't have that, is everything that I write that concerns some of the demands that, or any of the demands that our young organizers have asked for, I actually pass it to them and say, like, what do you guys think about this? How can it change? Like I'll write the first draft because they're all students. They all have better things to do with their time than to like draft policy. But I'll ask them, like, what do you guys think about this? And we debate back and forth, and we don't always agree on things. And they put me in my place as well as they should, right? I think like we tend to think of, adultism is a thing, right? We need to adults need to check themselves. Like we don't know what is best for young people. We just don't. And I know that, as parents, we're like, oh, but we do. I have 3 kids. One of them is 18 years old. I don't know what's best for her. All I can do is help guide her based on my experience. That's all I can do. And that is what really, I think, like the position that adults in our society need to take is that young people right now, they are demanding a Green New Deal. They are demanding, they are pushing for the calls for defunding the police. They know what their world needs. And what adults in power need to do is say, all right, let's work together. And in fact, why don't you help us write these policies? And let's just give you the seat of power, even though you can't really technically have it. What I would also like to see is a participatory budgeting model, which I know a lot of cities around the US have. And I think it's a really powerful way where citizens or residents in that area can actually have a hand in saying, this is where I want my money allocated. It's a powerful model of democracy and public budgeting that I would love to see Oak Park enact. But again, I don't think we have the votes to do that.
Thanks for that, Arti. Anne or Ben?
I mean, I would go back to transparency. Once again, I try to be a really open person, and I try to make whatever I'm doing open and available to anyone that asks. And so I think that when you're doing something that you believe is right, and you're doing something that, like, I really truly believe I'm a public servant. Like, I don't exist in any other capacity besides the public that I serve. And so I'm always, people want to come and do a ride along, or want to come and see what our teams do. And I think that as a community, you should be asking to do a ride along, or you should be asking to be included in meetings, or you should be asking to be a part of the process. We have a policy convening group for our Familiar Faces team, because we get technical assistance from the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, the national lead bureau. And so one of the charges is that we have a policy convening group, and that group in Olympia is 25 people. The county south of me, it's 6 people. And I think that speaks volumes, is like, you want to be able to open yourself up to your faith-based community, to people with lived experience, to your business community, because we all want a safe and vibrant community to live in. And there's hard conversations that happen between a business owner that wants to open up their business and a houseless person that uses that business as their house in the middle of the night. And so it's not easy to bring in all of those groups, but you always find, like, there's those nuggets of, if everybody is being truthful at the table, that they want what's best for that person. And whenever people push back and say that whenever you're offering an alternative to law enforcement, that is easy, no, it's more work to engage a human and walk alongside them and support them without a resolve clear, without, that whole resolved, cleared, move on kind of attitude. It's a lot more work. And so I think reframing it, that it's going to be lighter, it's going to be easier. It's a lot more work to engage an alternative police response than it is. And I think just showing that to the public and inviting them in on the process, on the policies, on the criteria of who gets in, are there disqualifiers, and having voices around the table that are representative of your community.
Yeah, and I would just add that I feel like that one, I really appreciate what Arti was saying as far as the work that she's doing is being a conduit for those youth voices. And I think part of the challenge I'm seeing here in our community here right now is, even within the current kind of BLM focused activist groups and stuff like that, I'm not seeing anybody step up on the government side to really help be that conduit, to really like help them figure out what are the channels, how do we create and craft our demands into something, that can be helpful. And I think if every community could, find the folks like Arti that are within the governmental system that could help be a conduit for some of those voices. And for those of us that are a little bit more plugged in, to maybe take time to try to create platforms. One of the things I've been working on internal here at Whitebird a little bit is around how to get some more advisory kind of panels set up to kind of help us, like, be like, okay, like, we're hearing people want more transformation within public safety. What does that really mean to you and your group? And what is Whitebird's role kind of in helping to kind of move the puck that way? But that linkage piece, I just think, is so necessary, because I feel like, a lot of law enforcement definitely, and even some city governments, is what we're hearing, are starting to get into these really defensive stances where they're not willing to listen or change anything, and I think that that's really going to just create more of the chaos conflict that a lot of us are hoping can resolve and hoping can turn into actualized change. But without those linkages, I don't know how that works, and so I guess that's the only commentary I have, is that we definitely see a need for that kind of linkage, because otherwise you've just got voices in the streets that aren't able to actualize the kind of change they want to see. And I'm definitely hearing a lot of the panelists today like talk about different changes they're making in their area. And I'm going to try to create some connections here with some of the folks I know, because I think there's some definite, very specific, tangible changes that we need in our community as much as people need in other places.
Yeah, I think that lack of access to real public processes that value voice is such a huge barrier. And yeah, and like you were saying too, and it's a practice. Like it takes work, and it's a muscle you have to build to put in the work to do it. We, until 6 years ago in St. Louis for the Metropolitan Police Department, didn't have local control of the police department due to literally like Civil War era decision at the state level that took away control and created a state board that oversaw the police department. And so when that ended and we got local control, we had the first chance to choose our own police chief locally. And so there was a big push from activists to have a public process. And I was part of that board, that community board that was helping with the public process to have community voice. And they resisted the hell out of having just public forums, out of there being, when there was like the final few candidates, having those candidates have to talk to the community and like get community input and questions, down to like the civil service rules on how scoring went. Like it was all just so set up against any meaningful community input into the process, which was such a barrier to getting like an outcome that really matched what communities were calling for at the time. And like you were saying, Ben, that happened literally at the same time as one of our biggest like protest like moments from that Stockley verdict that Trey talked about earlier, and people just really like retreated and didn't want to give an inch. I'll pass to Trey for the last question. Oh, go for it.
Yeah, like it's interesting that like we're talking about digging in heels, like what's happened in Oak Park recently. Just 2 weeks ago, I introduced a resolution calling for defunding the police. It didn't go anywhere. It was voted down 5-2. So 2 in favor, 5 not in favor. But at the same time, our youth activists had a protest at the mayor's house or the village president's house. And this was not their first protest. People forgot that in the reporting of it. They have been protesting for 2 years, asking to speak with the village president, and he hadn't. And at that protest, there was some vandalism. And people were in an uproar about vandalism. My fellow trustees wrote the quickest response that I've ever seen to anything, denouncing the vandalism that happened, and saying that the protesters were responsible for the delay in police reform discussions. And I'm like, are you for real right now? Because we as a board are the reason that these police reform discussions and even transformation of policing hasn't happened. And yet here we are blaming it on one action of this youth group. While I may not agree with everything that Royal did that day, I do understand the frustration that they have. And so the digging in the heels is a response that naturally happens, I think, when systems start to feel pressure from outside and don't understand that the pressure that they're feeling is actually pressure that they put on themselves. Like that is the acknowledgement that fails to happen time and time again. And I think in organizing, there are gatekeepers or door smashers or whatever you want to call them that are doing the work to just like release that pressure and say, no, we're going to be in conversation with you, whether you like it or not. And I think that is like the first levee that really does need to break in a lot of these cities in order for these conversations to really start happening in a collaborative way.
Yeah. For our final question, we've been talking about first responder alternatives to police, and oftentimes I think a lot of conversations around defund the police that people take issue with that is just so heavy-handed on police. However, we often hear from police officers themselves that they're tasked with dealing with so many societal issues that they're called to fix every problem that we can think of almost. Like we talk about school discipline or mental health or the unhoused population. So within each of you all's work, have you all seen that police officers' jobs have gotten easier and better, or there are a lot of burden taken off of them that they can focus on other things? And then, yeah, how has conversation been with police officers in after implementing some of the first responder alternatives?
I mean, I'll just tell
Ben might have frozen.
Yeah.
Zoom.
I mean, I can go until we wait for Ben to come back. I think like what I'll say is we haven't, well, Oak Park already has. So we have Thrive Mental Health Center, which is a 24/7 crisis response team, and they come out with our police right now. That is not obviously the system that we want to, you know, remain in place. Like we want a non-police response to these things. What I will say is like the defunding the police thing, that line, the first thing that, you know, a trustee said to me at the recent debate was, okay, so you mean abolishing the police? And I was like, well, if you want to go there, let's go there. I'm fine. Like, let's do that. But no, defunding the police is not abolition. It is a step to that if that's how we want to do it, but it is not abolition. What it is really saying like, let's realign our budgets with our moral priorities of our village. That's it. That's what we're saying. And right now our budgets are out of alignment because we spend 40% of our general fund is where our property tax dollars go to the village is spent on policing. Why? Like, please help me understand why, and has it made our community safer? And by the way, like, we have the second or third largest police force per capita in the state of Illinois, yet we still see crime. So if police were really stopping crime, we might not like actually see that crime with the size of the police force that we have. So the conversations right now, we're still very much in Oak Park in the digging our heels in phase and saying, like the FOP released a statement at that board meeting that I was mentioning earlier that said, you know, this resolution to defund the police treats us as if it was our knees on, you know, George Floyd's neck. And I was like, really? We're gonna go there? And you know, people are digging their heels in. The police department is digging their heels in. The police chief, I think, is doing that. And we are right now at a standstill, but I think strategically, like as Chaz was saying earlier, the FOP contract is something, the Fraternal Order Police contract, which is coming up for renegotiation at the end of the year, is something that we absolutely need to look at because we do not have an independent oversight process, which yes, it's reactionary and it's a reform and we're gonna do it. And I'm kind of so for it. Like we still need to do it, right? Because right now the complaint process is just not even present and it's not an independent process. And I think the other thing strategically that we can do while people are digging their heels in is continue to do things like this, educate people that defunding the police doesn't mean that the police are going to go away tomorrow. It just means that instead of police, we know that there are calls like domestic violence calls where police can actually increase or escalate those issues, right? And I say this as a survivor of domestic violence. So it means that instead of police responding to those calls, we're going to have somebody else respond to those calls that is better equipped. And so I think like getting past the whole like, oh, it's abolition, like we need to get past that. And, you know, people said to me, well, why did you use that language? Well, that's the language that Black abolitionists came up with. So I'm gonna go with that and I'm not gonna change it and co-opt their message, but we're gonna get comfortable with that language. Because if the language is the thing that's bothering you, then we're really not gonna get anywhere. So that is kind of where we are at in Oak Park. We have a long way to go. And if we are really the progressive community that we say we are, I really hope that we can actually get to a place where we build a non-police emergency response team. I really hope we can get to that place because that creates opportunities for all of our people in our community to thrive. And that's really what Freedom to Thrive is all about. Ben, you were talking and then I jumped in because you froze.
Yeah.
Because I froze and disappeared because we're all trapped at home with our various internet providers, sometimes not doing well. Yeah, no, it's fine. I was just saying that I think that we definitely were initially seeing, CAHOOTS was initially seen as maybe stepping in, taking some of the funding, i.e. taking jobs from law enforcement. I think if you can get these kinds of teams on the ground, I think that the folks on the ground that are there in law enforcement, public safety, that really want to serve the community very quickly will very quickly, as they did with CAHOOTS, come to see you as an ally and as somebody who's actually taking stuff from them that they don't want to be in the middle of, that they're tired of handling themselves. And I think that what we hear consistently, again, from law enforcement across the country is they are tired of being the de facto mental health response. They're tired of being shouldering the burden of every hole in our safety nets, every brokenness in our culture. And I think that that becomes part of the place where you can build those partnerships, is to say, look, let somebody else deal with it. Like let somebody else like step in and handle some of these things. And I think it quickly proves itself out, at least again, my experience with the kind of appreciation that we get a lot of times from law enforcement here is around that piece. They're glad to take the person that's, maybe out there on the streets, homeless every night and intoxicated, by 9 o'clock every single night. They're happy to not have to deal with that. And on the reverse side, that's the ones that we're the most worried about them growing frustrated with and ending up something tragic happens because they're tired of dealing with that human being, and that's where we can get in and actually help. And so I think that, and again, one of the things that I'm really recommending is maybe cities don't need to do it at all at once. Maybe it's not your whole city. Maybe it's not every day a week. CAHOOTS was like 6 to 8 hours, 3 days a week when it started. And now we're 24/7 in 2 cities with a second van that comes on 16 hours a day. I mean, it took 30 years to get there, but we built towards it over a lot of years. But it's still like you can start incrementally, and you can start with geographic areas. Denver Star Project, they started just with like a little tiny strip where they had a whole lot of high intensity call volume involving behavioral health along a single avenue, and they just started focusing there first. And it's starting to prove itself out. I believe they'll expand over the next year or two. So.
Well, I'm in a police department right now. So, so I hear from officers every day, and I would echo what Ben and Arti said. So our Familiar Faces program, we asked our officers to give us the top 10 names of individuals that they didn't ever want to engage with again. And they didn't want to engage with them ever again because they didn't like these people as humans, but they were not the right person to be engaging this person day in and day out. And any jurisdiction, whether you're rural, whether you're urban, you ask your officers what would help them, and they will tell you. And if you go in there and say, what do you need? What does crisis response look like to you? What can we take off of your plate, and engage them in the conversation? I think that they'll respond to that. In my mind, in the 2 years that we've been doing this, if we're going to completely move away from law enforcement responding to calls where the nexus of the situation is behavioral health, substance use, poverty, disability, you have to be as a robust response as law enforcement, or they will always end up responding. So until you have another option besides a jail or a hospital that is 24/7, that is staffed, that is warm, that has people there, that's going to be the option. And so our officers love our programs. I think, like Ben said, it's like the ones on the street doing the work, they don't want to respond to the person at 7-Eleven with no pants on that's trying to steal a Coke. They don't want to do that. And they love it when our crew team shows up, because we've got the van, we've got the backpack, we've got the socks, we've got the shoes, we've got the pants. The world needs more belts, people. Like, pants are falling down. So I think, I guess I'm just in a different situation where we started off of the rock of law enforcement and built from there, because whether it's the right or the wrong, the last 50 years in Olympia, the relationships that our downtown folks have day in and day out had been cops. And so those cops were the ones that bridged us. They connected us to our clients. And then they walked away and they said, Ben, meet Ann. Ann's got smoke and she's gonna talk to you. And then they walked away. So your situations are gonna be different depending on where you're at. And I totally respect that, but that's how we built our programs. And we were lucky enough to have Eugene, 4 hours south of us to go mind meld off of them.
And a police chief that also had spent time down at EPD and had already seen the program live working in our city. And I definitely know that opened some doors.
And funding. So you guys got to get money that you can offer free and voluntary services. You got to not be tied to Medicaid billing. Someone should just be able to say that their name is Honey Bucket and you serve them and doesn't matter. And the cost of really helping people is more expensive than Medicaid or policy makers, minus the one on our screen with us, will ever imagine. Like, people don't change in 90 days. It takes McDonald's gift cards, it takes cigarettes, it takes the least restrictive options to moving somebody, and humans are expensive. And so I think we need to pay the people doing the work more, and we need to walk away from thinking that we can't solve a problem with a pack of cigarettes, because if a pack of cigarettes is going to solve the problem, give that person a pack of cigarettes. Like, don't try to solve a $5 problem with like a protocol or a policy.
I really appreciate bringing that funding part too. Because yeah, in our St. Louis, one of the things that Trey looked at, it's like 3% and less is how much we spend on health and human services out of our budget. So
0.3%.
Don't let them try to tell you to use Medicaid dollars. Medicaid dollars, don't let them try to like say that that's what Medicaid is for, because it'll set up so many barriers for you to serve your people. It's a great thing, but push back on that is my suggestion.
Good to know. Thank you. So we're getting near the end, but we want to give you all a chance to just end on a final word. Anything that you want to share with the good people?
My final word would be one of the greatest things that we've ever done is hire folks with former incarceration experience to work with our police department and with this population. And people say a lot of times, really nice white liberal people say that they truly believe that, someone should come into the community and be re-embraced by the community, but then they don't hire people. And so you need to hire folks with lived incarceration experience. And the most powerful thing to me is when people that are working alongside your peers have no idea of what they are on paper, and they just know that person in front of you, but that peer inside of them is going to be able to build off of those experiences. And when you staff, we have a staffing where there's a public defender and law enforcement and a prosecutor and mental health professionals, and we're all staffing the same person. When one of us is like, ugh, third time for treatment, that peer is going to go to bat for that person and been like, it was 7 times for me, and I built it. And like, so for me, the greatest thing for our programs is hiring for people with lived experience and then elevating them and truly investing in their success.
Thanks for that, Ann. Arti or Ben, final word?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I have a lot of thoughts in my head like all the time. Like I recently started law school because I have been wanting to be a lawyer since I was 12. But this idea, like the thread that's always in my head is, what is justice? Like especially in the case when you think about Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, like what is justice? And does our current system actually deliver justice? Justice to me, as a person who has been through child abuse and domestic violence, is harm reduction, like the prevention of harm. Justice isn't like this reactionary thing, but that's what our current justice system is that somebody gets harmed, somebody's doing the harm, and it's all reactionary. And we don't actually ever address the fact that harm is being done to both people, right? Because hurt people. And so I think about that, but then I also think about, James Baldwin and how long must we wait for progress. And I think about, all of these abolitionists that have existed before me, and it's like, how is it that we are moving so slowly towards creating a system that actually says everybody here should have an equal chance to say, I am hurt and I need help. And everybody doesn't have a chance to do that in our current world. And so when I look at what's happening federally, because I focus on federal issues too, especially as a military veteran, and I look at our foreign policy and how we bomb predominantly Black and brown and predominantly Muslim countries, and I look at what we do in Black and brown areas here, everything to me is connected. And I feel like there is just this, and I say this to my fellow elected officials, that until we recognize, and that's what that poster behind me says, like until we recognize that every governmental body that we have in America is basically founded on white supremacy. And until we reckon with that, and we say as elected officials, like it's our job to then try and root out those systems of white supremacy and oppression by policies, we are never going to get to a place where people actually have the opportunity to say, I'm hurt and I need help without the carceral state harming them. Point blank, period. And so I think and I get really emotional about it because I see our young people and I just feel so I go to bat for them because I feel like we are failing them and we have failed generations of people before them. And so to anybody that's watching this call and to organizers out there, like we just need to keep organizing. And yes, it's hard and it's heartbreaking. It's always heartbreaking to lose fights, but we have to keep on doing it. So I'm grateful to be on this call because I've learned so much from all of you. So thank you so much.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and just briefly, I really appreciate hearing all of the different great ideas and work that other people are doing in other areas. And I feel really honored to kind of be in a place here with our agency to be able to help give one example that can be put back to the communities and to the naysayers that are like, oh, those folks with mental health issues are too dangerous. Well, that's mental health stigma. Somebody actually did a recent survey of our program as well as many others that do this kind of response, and universally it came back that there were low to no incidences to the point where none of us even track it of serious injury. But the first thing you're going to hear from a lot of people is, oh, what do you mean unarmed responders? That's dangerous. Somebody's going to die. We get that frequently on social media posts with some of the media we've been getting recently. And I'm like, well, 50 years later, we're all still okay, knock on wood. Tragedies might happen, but stigma, mental health stigma, I think is a huge piece of the other kind of side of also the institutionalized racism that also equally needs to be addressed and looked at. The stigma towards individuals who are low income, homeless, and or struggling with mental health, behavioral health issues is equally strong within all of the systems and the way they've been designed, and they're not there to help people or to hear them out. And that's the other piece that also has to be kind of reckoned with as we kind of look at reimagining public safety with a new kind of human service lens.
Thank you all so much. Truly, it's been so amazing to hear about other efforts and other passionate people across the country that are doing it, because sometimes in the blinders, siloed kind of work in a city, especially when there can be so many losses, it can really get demoralizing and hopeless. And so it's really powerful and energizing to hear all of your voices and your passion and your work. So thank you for that. And know that we're still gonna keep in touch and keep in relationship. And so please share with us if you all have wins And we hope to work with other organizers and organizations like Arch City and Action St. Louis here to keep plugging away at it, because it's vital. People's lives are on the line. So with that, thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time and hope you have a good rest of your night.
Yeah, thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
Everyone, thank you for
Bye.
attending here and on Facebook.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Good night.
See you.